His room is dark except for the light from his phone. He tilts his face sideways, takes a screenshot, draws lines over his jaw, measures angles, zooms into his eyes, checks the symmetry of his skull. Then he opens TikTok again. Another creator tells him his face is genetically weak. Another says women only want top-tier males. Another explains how to reshape bone structure. Another says your entire future is decided by your genetics before you even speak. And somewhere in that endless algorithm, he finds Clavicular. At first it feels entertaining. Funny edits, dark humor, shock value, chaos, but after enough hours, something changes. The jokes stop feeling like jokes. And slowly, an entire generation of young men starts viewing themselves less like human beings and more like unfinished biological projects. That is what makes Clavicular terrifying, not because he invented this culture, but because he became the perfect symbol of it. Because Clavicular was not really selling masculinity, he was selling inadequacy. And insecure people are the easiest people in the world to monetize for most of human history. Teenagers compared themselves to maybe a few people. Your classmates, friends, people in your town. That was it. Now, a 14-year-old boy can consume more elite genetic specimens in one afternoon than a medieval person saw in their entire lifetime. Perfect bodies, perfect faces, perfect lives, perfect money, perfect status, and the brain cannot handle that psychologically. Because social media does not show average reality, it shows statistical extremes. The richest, the tallest, and the hottest, the most controversial, the most emotionally extreme. And after enough exposure to that, normal life starts feeling worthless. That is the environment Clavicular exploded in. An internet ecosystem already infected by comparison addiction. And what made him spread so fast was not intelligence. It was emotional intensity. The internet today rewards whoever creates the strongest emotional reaction. Fear, anger, shock, humiliation. That is why calm people rarely dominate algorithms, but unstable people often do. Clavicular understood modern attention better than most corporations. Every clip had to feel dangerous. Every moment had to feel unpredictable, like something insane could happen at any second, because modern attention spans are dead. People do not watch content anymore. They inject stimulation directly into their nervous system for hours. And creators like Clavicular became the perfect drug for that system. But underneath all the irony, all the memes, all the edits, there was something darker happening. Young men online were becoming deeply psychologically damaged. Not because they were weak, because the algorithm learned exactly how to exploit male insecurity. One video says, "You are too short." The next says, "Your jaw is weak." The next says, "You have bad genetics." The next says, "Women only want dominant men." The next says that your face determines your entire life. Imagine hearing that every single day during your teenage years. Eventually, the brain adapts to it. And once somebody starts viewing themselves primarily through flaws, they become trapped in endless self-analysis. That is why entire communities online became obsessed with looksmaxxing. At first, it sounded normal. Gym, haircuts, skincare, fashion, basic self-improvement, but the internet destroys moderation. Everything online eventually mutates into extremism, so self-improvement slowly transformed into self-obsession. Then self-obsession became self-hatred. Teenagers started talking like failed laboratory experiments, negative canthal tilt, subhuman genetics, low-tier male, facial harmony, bone density. Imagine being 16 years old and genuinely believing your skull shape determines whether you deserve love. That is not confidence. That is psychological warfare. And the scariest part, millions of young people related to it, because underneath all the toxic language, there was real pain there. A lot of boys online feel invisible, lonely, rejected, emotionally disconnected, and instead of teaching them emotional resilience, the internet gave them hyper-analysis. It told them every human problem could be solved through optimization, not healing. Optimization. Become leaner, richer, more attractive, more dominant, more masculine. The problem is, there is no finish line, because online perfection is infinite. There is always somebody, better looking, richer, stronger, more famous, more desired. So the insecurity loop never ends, and the algorithm loves that, because insecure people stay online longer. A secure person closes the app. An insecure person scrolls for 6 more hours trying to fix themselves. That is why social media companies profit massively from emotional instability. The more somebody hates themselves, the easier they are to manipulate commercially. And eventually, this mindset starts infecting everything. Friendships become competition. Dating becomes market analysis. People stop asking, is this person kind? Instead, they ask, how socially valuable is this person? Everything becomes transactional. Everything becomes performance. Nobody relaxes anymore. Nobody feels enough anymore. That is why so many creators in these spaces spiral publicly, because constant performance destroys the human mind, especially when your entire identity becomes dependent on audience validation. Eventually, you stop existing privately. Every emotion becomes content. Every breakdown becomes engagement. Every controversy becomes fuel for the algorithm. And Clavicular became one of the clearest examples of that phenomenon. The internet rewarded instability faster than maturity. Chaos spread faster than wisdom, because outrage travels at the speed of dopamine, and modern platforms are designed around dopamine extraction. That is why emotionally extreme creators often explode faster than balanced ones. They trigger stronger reactions, and reactions generate attention. But what makes this entire situation tragic is that many of the people consuming this content are children, teenagers whose brains are still forming, teenagers learning their self-worth from algorithms trained purely to maximize engagement, not mental health, not happiness, engagement. And maybe that is the darkest thing about this entire generation. Young people today are more connected than any humans in history, yet many have never felt more isolated because social media replaced community with audience. And those are not the same thing. An audience watches you, a community supports you. And when your entire identity becomes dependent on external validation, you slowly lose the ability to exist peacefully alone. That is why so many people today feel empty, even when constantly stimulated. Because stimulation is not fulfillment, virality is not love, attention is not connection, and the internet confused an entire generation into believing they were the same thing. That is why creators like Clavicular became cultural symbols. Not because they were uniquely evil, but because they reflected what the algorithm was already turning people into: hyper self-conscious, emotionally numb, performance obsessed, chronically insecure, addicted to comparison. And maybe one day people will look back at this era the same way we look at cigarettes in the 1950s. A system everybody secretly knew was harmful, but nobody stopped because it was too profitable. The internet promised young people confidence, but for millions of them, it delivered obsession instead.